One of the biggest moments of this current presidency occurred this week with Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy announcing that he is retiring from the court. For many conservatives, Supreme Court nominations were the single most important issue of the last election, the reason they voted, and they'll be watching this very closely. Who are the frontrunners to replace Justice Kennedy, and what do we know about them? Joining us now is someone who knows the answers. Leonard Leo is an outside advisor to the president on judicial nominations, and he joins us now. Leonard, thank you very much for coming on. So we're hearing a number of names batted around. Amy Barrett is at the top of every list I've read in the last 2 days. Tell me, what do we know about Amy Barrett?
Amy Barrett's a judge on the 7th Circuit out there in the Midwest in Chicago. She's from Indiana. Very distinguished law professor from Notre Dame Law School, clerk for Antonin Scalia, one of the most articulate and intelligent originalists in the country, very talented woman.
Brett Kavanaugh.
Brett Kavanaugh is a very respected judge here in Washington, D.C. on the U.S. Court of Appeals. He's been on that court for over a decade. He's respected on all sides of the political spectrum as one of the best lawyers in the country. Spent a lot of time in Washington serving in government, arguing before the Supreme Court. He's written a lot of opinions. Very deep believer in the idea that if you want to protect freedom and human dignity, you have to preserve the structural limits on government power in our Constitution. A lot like Neil Gorsuch, Tucker.
So if you're following this at home, who else should you be looking up on Wikipedia right now?
Well, look, the president came up with this great idea, one of the most transparent things we've ever seen in judicial selection, which is to put out a list of all the people from which he'd pick. There are 25 on there, which is an awful lot of people. But you should be certainly looking at people like Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Barrett, Tom Hardiman, who's someone who the president interviewed last time. He's a judge out in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Ray Kethledge, who's a judge out in Michigan. There are a couple of other very distinguished women on the list. Joan Larson, who's out from Michigan, and Allison Ide, who's from Colorado. All Court of Appeals judges, all people who really want to interpret the law as it's written and who understand that the court has a duty to enforce the limits on government power and to interpret the Constitution according to its text and original meaning. They really believe in the rule of law, and it's a tremendous opportunity for the president to pick another justice like Neil Gorsuch, who's extraordinarily well qualified, very courageous and independent, and who wants to interpret the Constitution the way the framers meant it to be.
Can Democrats stop this? Can you imagine a scenario where they could?
I think if the president has a process like he had the first time, engages in lots of advice and consent, picks a great nominee like Neil Gorsuch, if he uses the Gorsuch model, I think it's impossible for the Democrats to really stop him.
Can you imagine? I think Gorsuch got a couple Democratic votes. Can you imagine that happening this time? Or have things changed too much?
I think so, Tucker. I mean, again, if you pick someone who's extraordinary and someone who really does just believe in interpreting the law as it's written, that's what garners widespread public support. And I think it's particularly hard in an election year like this one for moderate Democrats to resist a nominee who's so talented and who's so committed to being a fair arbiter in court.
I think you're probably right. Leonard Leo, thank you very much for that. I know you're right at the center of this process, so it's nice to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, Tucker. Thanks.
Thank you.